Hey, good morning, folks. This is Alex Stevens, your host. I'm an epic evangelist from Australia, basically based out in Brisbane. Nice to meet you all, and sorry that we couldn't be there physically. Unfortunately, lockdowns have us kicked out and keeping in Australia this whole time. So welcome to our panel, Adapting to Change. Today we're going to be talking about the experiences of our fine four panelists here. Fortunately, Hannah couldn't be here this morning, so it's just going to be me on the big screen and us lovely folks just down below. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, let's get a little bit of an intro from each one of our panelists. So I guess we'll start from left to right. Oh, I'll flip over here. So I guess let's go for little Jordan over here.
Hey.
Jordan, take it away.
Yeah, cool. So I'm Jordan. I've been working professionally in the industry for about 13 years now, all in Wellington at Wellington Studios. So I started at Pickpock a long time ago when they were still doing predominantly console development, and they were still called She at the time. I was there for their transition to mobile gaming. I was there as they transitioned through multiple engines, eventually having their own custom engine for a number of years. After that, I moved to A44 briefly, where I worked on Ashen, and then to Weta Workshop with the Magic Leap crew doing XR stuff. And now, yeah, I'm a technical director at Studio Mayday, where we're working on Unreal on an unannounced title.
Hello, my name's Izzy. I am a UI designer at A44. I have been in the games industry for a grand total of a year and a half. A44 is my first experience. And yeah, I've been learning a lot in the past year and a half. I suppose that's about it, actually. Not much to say.
Yeah, and I am Dana Henwood, and I work with Izzy at A44 Games, but previously I was working at Pickpock. Started about 7 to 8 years ago there, and then yeah, just did a whole bunch of graphic design and other work. And yeah, my core tasks at A44 is visual design and just assets for visuals. Yeah.
I'm Brandon Grimshaw. I've been in the industry for about 7 years. I started at Kimbo Creations, where we were with Unreal Engine for about 18 months, doing multiplayer programming. Bounced back to Australia, went to Gameloft Brisbane, and then I went to Snapchat, because they opened a studio in Brisbane. From there, I came to Starcult. And we've been using UE4 for our next title, after Best Friend Forever. Yeah, I'm a kind of generalist programmer, do a bit of everything, but traditionally I've specialized in multiplayer.
Cool, thanks for the intro, guys. So, to get started, let's talk about your first experiences with Unreal Engine. So, we heard from Brandon that you started about 18 months ago. You started quite a while back, working with the Kimbo, and same with Jordan, as I understand. You folks played around with a bit of UE back in the day. So I'm curious about everybody on the panel's experiences with first starting, how they got into it, where they started learning, where they're getting their learning resources from, and stuff like that. I was curious about each panelist's unique perspective, because I know Izzy, for example, wasn't really in game development beforehand, and is now going fresh straight into UE4, whereas the other folks have got a little bit more of a varied experience with different game engines and coming in and translating their skills and expertise from an existing engine. So I might actually focus on Izzy first up. Lucky you. So coming from web design and, graphic design, I should say, and that whole process, how's your experience been going to a game engine?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking engine migration. I haven't exactly migrated from another engine as such. Like, I am very much still in my first experience of like being hands-on with game development and making things. I've been joking with people that does Photoshop count as an engine? Because maybe that could be what I'm migrating from.
It's a migration of industry, right?
Yes, no, absolutely. Well, and yeah, I mean, I've done that a fair bit, actually, in my time. I have like a fine art background, you know, where people were like, huh, computers, like, what can you use those for? But yeah, no, I mean, I have basically just felt like I've been learning. I mean, I went to media design school as well and definitely touched engines there, and really wish that I'd kind of gotten a bit more, I don't know, into it at that point. But, you know, any kind of familiarity has basically just been as useful as it can be. I think I've also felt really lucky to be surrounded by tons of people at my company who have like an immense wealth of experience, and so they've kind of been a primary resource, actually. Although I am very cognizant of not wanting to waste like people's precious time, basically. So, you know, I feel like it's probably a fairly standard thing where I come up against a little problem and I'll go to the documentation first, primarily actually to try and find like correct keywords for what I'm trying to figure out, because if I use what I think might be the correct word, again, in something like Adobe Suite, it's usually completely wrong. And so documentation will help me with like a keyword that I can then search in YouTube, so that I'm not going down off like complete kind of garden paths.
And that seems to be a bit of a pattern, even between game developers, because I was, unfortunately she couldn't be here, but talking to Hannah just the other day, and I was talking about using cards for foliage, and she was like, oh, I haven't heard that term, we just call it a texture on a tri or on a poly, right?
Oh, wow.
So even in between game engines and industries and stuff like that, there's major differences. So
Yeah, totally.
So you're not alone.
Terminology has been an interesting obstacle that's popped up. But again, that's part of it, right? Like learning the lingo.
Yeah. How about you, Dana? How about your experience with learning UE for the first time and moving across from another engine?
Yeah, so, well, I'm basically in the same position as Izzy, and my knowledge comes from like a pure artist background or graphic design background, where I did mostly work in, sorry if you can't hear me, Adobe Suite. And I guess my first time opening up Unreal, I was like, oh, widget blueprint, this is like a Photoshop canvas, right? I can wireframe things in here. It works pretty familiar. So I wasn't too overwhelmed in that sense. Like I opened it up and I was like, hey, there's a box. I can make things work with this. And yeah, just kind of applying knowledge from that side. I guess, yeah, it wasn't all smooth sailing, I would say. I think obviously, I've only been working in it for about a year now, and it's still very basic stuff, and it's a lot more just fiddling around and trying to see how someone else has set something up so I can say, oh, I understand that. Like trying to plug things in certain places and trying to not break things, but, you know, trying to see their thought process around how they set this up so I can also adapt and apply my knowledge into what would work. Yeah.
So a lot of learning by osmosis, right?
Yeah.
Cool, yeah. And actually, on that point about being a UI designer and moving to UE, have you found that your pipelines and workflows have changed? So like I know that traditional designers, like web designers and stuff like that, they'll be going into a wireframe program and scratching it out and kind of just getting the general layout in on paper first, and then kind of getting approvals and going through all that old style pipeline. Do you find that that has changed? And this is probably a bit more of a question for both you and Dana. Sorry, you and Izzy, sorry. Have you found that you've changed your workflows a little bit moving into what's called Unreal Motion Graphics in UE? It's a what you see is what you get designer for the folks out there that don't use UE?
Surprisingly, not much change at all. I think the most surprising thing for me has been learning that you can do previs in Unreal Engine in a way with UNG and stuff like that. So I think it kind of, if you do have knowledge with After Effects and Photoshop and you're like, hey, I can sort of use what I know here with like keyframes and whatnot in UMG, and you're like, hey, this knowledge works here too. And so, for example, if you do want to make like a really, really fancy animated previs, you might start elsewhere, but then you're like, can I make this in Unreal? And my surprise was, yes, you can start in Unreal first if you want. So I think that was kind of like a big learning, like, surprise for me. There's been a whole bunch of experiences like that where I've been like, oh, I can start backwards. Well, not backwards, but, you know, I can start backwards, then go elsewhere, then come back, kind of thing. That has probably been my biggest change to my workflow, trying things out first before I, you know, finalize a storyboard or finalize my final goal. I can just start, have a different goal, and like, it can change throughout, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, kind of evolve, right? Yeah. And so I guess here's the next question is going from a traditional design point of view, have you dipped your toes into the blueprints arena?
Tiny parts here and there. I do still see blueprints and kind of feel this like, oh, like, whoa. Well, depending on the blueprint. Luckily, a lot of the ones that I have come across are incredibly like, oh yeah, okay, linear. But again, for me at least, it feels like a problem of like terminology, you know? It's this thing of like, oh, okay, what does it mean to have a float, you know? I'm like, huh? And people are going, you can break it apart, you can do all this amazing stuff. And I'm like, yes, tell me more, because I need to hear this a couple of times before it's gonna break the like barrier.
So you might find yourself knocking on the door of, say, a programmer like Jordan or Brandon and getting a bit of advice and pointers and stuff like that. And you might even be finding that you'll be working a little bit closer with a programmer, you find? Or is that a little bit different to your experience?
We work very closely with, a lot of different people. We work very closely with a particular dedicated UI programmer who has the patience of a saint and has taught me so much. So definitely, like, I don't know, I'm also like Dana in the way that it's like I'll kind of try and break into something and figure it out, you know, like what happens if I do plug this in somewhere else or put it through a little, you know, node that I can like, you know, change a number on the fly. And that's really, really fun to be able to just noodle around in, basically. But after a point, it usually is like, okay, I have broken it.
I'm on fire, yeah.
And now I need to ask someone.
But that's the best thing, right? Is being able to poke and prod and then just act as if, yeah, everything's good, nobody's looking, and then just revert it back and go, okay, I need help.
That's when it feels most like learning. I'm like, yeah. Okay. That's the limit, maybe.
So I'm going to segue because I know I've been neglecting the programmers at the ends of the table here. So on that point of working closely with teams and being a resource, it seems that the programmers from Izzy and Dana's perspective have a little bit of a say in, hey, this is how I would do things and stuff like that. So I know for you two, you've both had a bit of experience with UE going into a team that hasn't used it. So I would like to know how much of a resource you guys are versus maybe a bit of self-learning from the rest of your team, and also for yourselves as well. Like when you started UE, what were the resources that you used to learn the engine?
Oh, yeah, sure. So when I learned UE, I guess we'll start there. I just joined A44 as the tech lead, and I had never really used UE before at all. And obviously there's an established team who knew exactly what they're doing. They're cranking out content, doing great stuff. I knew nothing. I was useless. I've never felt more useless in my job than starting there and sitting down and, like, I'd opened it, right? Like, I wasn't a complete moron. But it doesn't prepare you for actually using the tools in a pipeline and trying to build stuff and working with people's stuff. And so I was lucky because I didn't really have time to chase documentation or like actually work through a process or do a course. And someone sat down with me for 2 weeks and they taught me UE. And the person was Ben from Rocketworks, and he's amazing. And he was, I guess, on the time he was on his way out. And so rather than getting anything done, he taught me, I guess, everything I could learn about his animation system and stuff he built. And I guess it makes a huge difference. Like having someone you can talk to, you've got a question, you've seen something you don't understand, having someone you can ask a question to and get an answer immediately is incredibly valuable. Like I think it's far faster than reading documentation, it's far faster than doing a course. And so at Mayday, much like Alex said, I think I was the only person with any Unreal experience when we started up. You know, like, why are we in Unreal? And so I spent, I guess, the first couple of months not really getting anything done. I just answered questions. And I genuinely believe it is easier and faster to have someone who can point you in the right direction and show you what you need to find, rather than just everyone independently navigating for the right stuff. You know, the documentation when it exists is really good, and there's obviously tutorials and YouTube and all sorts of stuff. But a lot of it is not great, and some of it is even wrong. And so I personally, you know, if I can point someone in the right direction and be like, well, you know, don't trust that, trust this stuff, this is all the good stuff. I think it's just easier as a method of guiding a studio into how to use an engine.
Yeah, I've got a pretty similar message. Like, having someone on the team that already knows it is invaluable. And at Starcult, I've kind of been that person, and Lucy's been in UI, trying to script stuff, and when she runs up against something that she gets stuck on and she can't immediately find the answer, she'll turn to me. And having someone to point you in the right direction is very important. Unfortunately, when I first started with UE4, I was fresh out of uni, didn't know anything. No one else on the team did either. It was a very interesting experience.
Quite tough.
Yeah, and this was relatively soon after they first went public, and soon after they went to the rev share model. And there wasn't a lot of documentation, sorry.
Well, that's okay. Like, this is the thing is, I don't want to be controlling the talk about anything. We want to know your literal experience with UE, and for the folks out there listening in, where they should be looking and aiming their attentions to.
Yeah, so I learned really fast how to dig into the source code to find out how things work, and that's a very, very valuable skill to have as a programmer. Would 100% recommend, if you're getting into it as a programmer, spend some time trying to make a little game jam game. And when you run up to something that's not super well documented, you can't find like the right write-up on it or a YouTube video on it, just go look at how it works, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, so you find that your mentors when you first started weren't really the rest of your team because nobody knew it, but the mentors of the programmers that had already laid out the foundations of the engine, right?
Yeah, it was basically Epic themselves.
Yeah, and that's actually a bit of, I'm going to inject a bit of my experience as well, as when I first started UE, it was back in Rocket days, or the beta days in 2014. And I came from UDK, which had Unreal script back then, and now it went to C++ and Blueprints. And the same thing, I was like, what is this? There's like 1 million+ lines of code here. There's a lot here that I can strip apart and just kind of learn from, right? And so I found myself, and I still do to this day, it's just kind of like, oh, is there, like, there's the docs, I'll have a look, I'll get a general gist, but I can guarantee there's something in the engine that I can just copy or take inspiration from.
Finding usages of a piece of functionality is the #1 way to find out how to actually use it.
Yeah, and you get really good examples because, like, there are so many more intelligent people than I am at Epic because they're all absolute gun engineers. So it's almost like I'm sitting beside them, kind of going, yeah, tell me more. Except without, it's just a one-way conversation. It's a bit weird, right? But yeah, so on that point with C++, I know that both you and Jordan have had a bit of C# experience, a lot of other varied experience. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a little bit of web dev experience as well in the past, potentially. Could be wrong there. But how's your experience with learning Unreal C++? Do you find it similar to traditional C++, or C#, or what are the analogies?
Yeah, I guess I don't think I'm a good C# programmer. You know, I work in Unity, and I think a lot of people do, and you just kind of bumble your way through. But I learned, at university, I learned just C. And then when I joined PickPock, their engines were all written in C++, and so, that was great. And they were very different from Unreal. I think the libraries and the consistency and all the existing templated code and stuff, I guess makes it, I would say, a lot easier for someone who doesn't have C++ experience to figure it out. Like, I think, yeah, these days, as a Unity programmer, you love C#, you could easily adapt and get into it. You're not worried quite to the same degree as like a pure C++ engine about memory management and other concepts which I guess plagued programmers in the past. These days, genuinely, I think it's very easy.
Yeah, I definitely second that one. When I first started in UE4, I was fresh out of uni, and they had taught me, the dangers of C++ and memory management. And thankfully, going into UE4, most of the scary stuff's taken care for you. So it's definitely a much less steep learning curve than just diving into, a proprietary engine. Going from UE4 to Gameloft and their proprietary engines was an interesting time. Yeah, no, it's relatively approachable.
And yeah, the only thing I can say is moving from C# to C++ at times is I miss coroutines and the concurrency. It's probably the only thing that I miss, but I kind of fill that gap a little bit with blueprints because you get the little delay nodes and other latent action nodes and stuff like that. So I guess at this point, what do you find is a bit of a pain point? Because I'm not above moving into this direction because I want the audience to know a little bit of your experiences from the less than wondrous side of the engine, because I'd prefer to set expectations rather than go, woo, this is an amazing thing that you should be looking at. Yeah, I was wondering, were there any hiccups that you came across? So we might start with Izzy and Dana.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this kind of briefly, but again, the major hiccups have just been kind of in primarily like weird assumptions, where it's just like, I remember for a while we were trying to define our an accessible text size, basically, and I had watched all these, talks, all this information where it's like, oh, you need to have everything be whatever, 18 points high or 18 pixels high, 24 points like maximum is better, or whatever, some number basically. And I was doing all this previs in Photoshop and then finding the kind of font sizes that I'd used and just kind of plug them in, or writing it up, basically writing up these accessibility documents, and the font was coming out way smaller, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? And it turns out that, again, I read this just randomly. I left my cursor somewhere and like a hover text box popped up and it was like, UMG uses slate units, which is 96 ppi, and Photoshop uses 72 as a default. And that was purely it. I was just like, oh my God. Like, I had sweated over this for days, and I think I ran like a little lap around like the kitchen bench just to be like, anyway, yeah, and it was just this thing of like, oh, of course, and then after that it was like, cool. But so it's not a hiccup on like Unreal's side, it's purely just this thing of like, okay, here's my background, and I thought that this was, you get taught this, I suppose, in like graphic design courses where it's like 72 is fine for web, and I was like, sweet, that's basically it. But it's not. And I realized this is not web. So yeah, no, it was just this kind of unknown, yeah, that's the one that stands out to me most. We've had little weird like bugs with sprites coming out of sprite sheets, and it doesn't look in like the right place. And I was like, how do I fix this? And again, it's just this thing of like, you save it and then you just swap the number, put it up one and then back to the correct thing, and it's like, oh,
Bit of twiddling.
Yeah, anyway, so, tiny little things, but I don't know, I don't think I'm experienced enough to be like, it's not user error, primarily.
It's one of those things where it's like, is it user error? But I think my pain point comes almost very similar to Aziz's one, where just typefaces and fonts is quite difficult for me to understand, especially trying to figure out how to do things that are in the engine and available to use as the engine is. I'm like, I would need to either embed this thing I want into my font primarily, and I can't do like kerning and whatnot inside engine without a plugin or anything that has been embedded elsewhere. I mean, obviously this is just me trying to figure it out, assuming I can edit a typeface as much as I want, which, it's not the end of the world being able to do it elsewhere, but it took me a lot of like Googling and a lot of trying to researching and a lot of scrolling through the marketplace being like, how can I adjust my kerning and my leading? How can I add paragraph styles? Because rich text does do like an awful lot, but it doesn't quite, or at least I haven't quite figured out how to do those exact bits and pieces where I'm like, this is a pain point because I can't figure it out, basically.
Yeah, like all those weird little formattings to say, hey, this is underlined or highlighted and stuff like that in line, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, perfect timing because we've got Hannah on the line. Hopefully she can be brought up next to us. There we go. Welcome to the chat. So, did you want to introduce yourself, Hannah?
Yes, because I'm sure introductions have already happened. Apologies for my fashionably late arrival. I'm Hannah Crosby. I work as a character and environment artist at Gameloft Brisbane, and we've just recently released a remake of the Oregon Trail game, which is my first game in Unreal.
Sweet, sweet. And so we've been getting a lot of perspective from the UI artists and the programmers on the panel here, and we were wondering how it is as a 3D artist to move to the engine. Were there any workflow changes that you made? I'm sure there were. And how, what learning resources that you were using to check it out, and what you found was useful, even what you found wasn't useful. No holds barred, right? So go for it.
Yeah, so as a 3D artist, even as an environment artist, I'm not generally allowed within 10 feet of the game engine because frankly, I don't think they trust us to have the technical know-how, and a lot of in-house engines are not necessarily artist friendly. So this is probably the first time as an environment artist I've been allowed to actually jump straight into the engine and build my worlds in engine, because the pipeline previously would have been build your world outside of Unreal or whatever engine you're using in, say, Maya or Max, whatever your program is, as a wholesale unit, and import that and all of the materials and the textures and everything into the engine, slap it down, single level, done. And kind of hope that all of the materials and the shaders and everything that the programmers are coming up with work for the objects that you've created, that the lighting doesn't create dramatically different effects to what you were expecting. So as an artist, there's a lot of trust and a lot of communication to actually get that process to work. This time we didn't really need that because I was able to create individual objects, every tree, every flower, every rock, and import all of those separately as individual objects, set up their shaders separately myself, and then assemble the world in Unreal, which is a much nicer process, I've got to admit. It makes a much faster iteration. So if I see something isn't working, the process between me, say, re-importing the mesh, tweaking the material, moving it around in the level, and then seeing again what it's going to look like in-game is much faster. So it's, much faster and much more actually all in the engine rather than doing things separately and then just kind of dumping it in there.
Yeah, so where did you learn a lot of your experiences for UE, or sorry, I should say, what learning resources did you use to kind of get into the engine?
Well, I definitely had a look at the stuff on the Unreal Epic website. A lot of their video courses where they take you through step by step to teach you different skills. I remember going through the shader course. How do you build your shader? Which of course I'd never done before, but being a Maya user, the whole node-based system came very intuitively, so that was fun. But
that was Unreal Online Learning, right?
Yes, it wasn't the documentation. It was definitely all the videos, the online learning stuff. I found the documentation to be only useful if you knew exactly what it was you were already looking for. So for a complete beginner, it was nonsense. So the video courses were much better at easing you into the process, giving you the little bit of information you needed initially before dropping you into the bigger stuff later on. I also found a lot of YouTube stuff. A lot of people have done their own individual courses on YouTube that will teach you very specific things, because the further you go on in your learning journey, the more specific questions you have. At the beginning, it's just give me all of the knowledge. I will soak it up like a sponge. And then once you've got the hang of it, you sort of go, but I want to know specifically, if I do X with the foliage tool, what's going to happen? And then you have some search terms to look for. So I did start using YouTube as a big resource as well.
Nice. And yeah, actually, I was talking to Brandon about this. He found that he was kind of in the same boat where documentation would get you so far, and YouTube for programmers is not always the greatest thing, but there's a little hot tip that I use, which is whenever you go to like a YouTube video or something like that, because I have to reference when I go into studios and talk to teams, and I'm like, oh, there's this YouTube video somewhere in the 2-hour talk. There's this one little thing, and I want to reference it. Go to the chat transcript, do a Control F, search, look for it, and then it'll take you right to the time zone. So yeah, it's a great little tool. But sometimes YouTube's little text-to-speech, or speech-to-text, I should say, doesn't always resolve some of those keywords.
No, I find when it's a bit of like jargon, YouTube really has trouble. I actually watch everything in minimum 1.25 speed, just because people speak quite slowly naturally, and I'm like, I want the information, I want it now, and if I've got a specific piece of information I'm looking for, 1.5 speed, and I will just blast through it until I hear the keyword that caused me to go, wait, slow down, that was the bit I wanted.
Yeah, 100%. Does that kind of reflect the rest of the panelists' view on things? It's kind of like a mix of resources, and sometimes videos aren't great, sometimes you just want the text right there to tell you when, right?
Yeah, I guess like I just want to hate on YouTube a little bit more. I think as a format, like, it's really interesting, and it is cool when you're following, I guess, like a tutorial or a process. But I do find, I mean, I already mentioned a little bit that sometimes it's just wrong, but no one goes back and fixes it. Like, you've made your video, you've put it up there, you're never going to like take it down and fix something that's factually incorrect. And so you do have to like trawl through the comments, you have to look for stuff, you have to try and figure out, you know, is this good? I do find, at least with kind of like blog posts, development, text, you know, people will fix stuff, right? It's easy, it's trivial. And I think there are some amazing resources, specifically like devblog stuff. Like, I do want to plug Ben UI does amazing tutorials about all sorts of stuff, just like really good content. He's constantly posting, he's making plugins and stuff. And I would say going the other way, I personally find, I guess, like Discord. So there's a Oceanic Unreal Slack, which I think Alex is in. I'm in there, but my name's different, so you won't know who I am. But it's incredible, right? I think if you have questions and your team doesn't have an Unreal representative who you can talk to, going somewhere like there, it's the right time zone. There's, I think, 300 or 400 people there, and there are some amazing developers who will answer your questions really quickly. And I think the group think of a bunch of people being in there, I guess, kind of self-corrects things that are wrong. If someone throws out something that's incorrect, like, people will jump in and be like, hey, I don't think that's correct, like, you should look into this. And so I do find it incredible if you're looking for kind of like a specific piece of advice.
Yeah.
So you find that the community is quite welcoming?
Oh, yeah, I would say incredibly. Like, there's so many people at, I guess, vastly different ranges of experience asking questions. And, you know, I think there's no shame in asking something even simple that you don't know about. So, yeah, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there and say, with that in mind, like, no question is a dumb question, because for a long time I could not Google something for the life of me. It was that little arrow in the viewport. It has show your FPS and take high-res screenshots in there. And I could not Google what that was. I was like, drop-down arrow thing. The thing in the top left, the thing in the viewport in the top next to perspective, and I couldn't find it out. And I was like, so I just had to go and bother someone, and I was like, where's this, I take high-res screenshot, I don't know, like, or just things like that where I just can't find it, but people know.
Yeah, there's so much useful information in the the Unreal Engine YouTube channel, but I intensely dislike having to sift through it, sorry. So I love when there's really comprehensive blog posts, and BenUI does phenomenal blog posts. We've used that internally for the last 6 months extensively. So yeah, that transcript tip is going to be very useful going forward.
Cool. So I guess that's a perfect segue to. There's a lot of misconceptions about UE4, or Unreal Engine in general. So I've even heard the case of people still thinking that there's Unreal script in the engine and that it's outdated and they don't want to touch the engine because of it. Are there any misconceptions that you folks have encountered or that you had about the engine, I guess, before going into it and realizing, oh, this is totally different to what I expected?
The misconception that blueprints are either not for programmers at all, or it's not real programming, or you can't make a game in Blueprint, that's obviously all false. Don't be afraid to use Blueprint. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Blueprint. Like, Blueprint's dope. I remember working at, when I was at Magic Leap, we're in Unity, and I guess there's a really interesting technical designer talk yesterday. And if you're a designer and you wanted to do stuff, I guess you learned C#, which seems kind of bizarre. It's like we had a lot of designers who were writing code, and then it would kind of get mixed in with the rest of it. And I think Blueprint, visual scripting language, is just an easier entry point for a lot of people. And I think, in particular, it does mean that artists who aren't going to learn C# can learn Blueprint. Like, that's actually pretty reasonable, given time and experience and guidance. And I think it's really powerful. I think the change towards more people working in engine, like Hannah mentioned, like everyone should be building stuff theoretically, and I think Blueprint really does let you do that. It's actually pretty useful.
My main misconception, I think, about Unreal and using Unreal is that everyone else knows everything about it, and it's like you, the newbie who doesn't know anything. And like the thing that I have realized is just that Unreal is like the software of softwares, It's like a mega city or something, and some people know a lot of it, but there are lots of people where it's like, I know this part, and like everything else, anyway, this is probably just like the very newbie kind of an insecurity, I suppose, where it's like, everyone else knows everything. It's like, no, get this, everyone's learning it like all the time as well, You can have been using it for ages, and there'll be something where it's like, I don't know what that is. And it's like, oh, anyway, that was the one thing where I was kind of like, okay, I needed to clear that up pretty quickly, and I need to remind myself of it.
Want to jump in there and say, yeah, Unreal Engine is massive. It's incomprehensibly big. And I feel like a lot of people have this kind of insecurity about like, oh, I'm not a real programmer, artist, whatever, experienced in UE4 because I don't know everything. No, you'll be coming across new stuff like constantly. There's just too much to learn within years. Like, you'll always be learning new stuff. I know I've been talking to Alex, and he's always learning new stuff, and he works for them. Like, don't feel bad.
Yeah, like I have an anecdotal experience about that where even the tools menu stuff that I did in the workshop just the other day, you'll find that here's a little secret for me and Chris and the rest of the team. So usually when we post something on Twitter, it's because like, oh my God, this is new. I'm going to post about this because everybody needs to know about this, right? So like, for example, the tools menu stuff, it came in 4.2.6. I didn't know about it because it's relatively experimental, but it's still super useful. It gives you the ability to put like a toolbar button in the level editor toolbar, right? And open your editor utility widgets. I'm probably going to ramble here, but I got that tip off by a guy named Jack Noble. And he was just kind of like, hey, have you heard about this? I don't know how to use it, but like, it's cool. And I was like, that is cool. Let's dive in, check it out. And you'll find that folks like that, like us, like enthusiasts, you might call us, might just go out and like share that knowledge. And I think that's one of the beautiful things, like that I personally think about the community. And I might be a little bit biased, but even before joining Epic, I found that the community sharing their knowledge, everybody was just keen to nerd out, right? And just share their cool shit. And apologies for the French, but it is what it is. How about you, Hannah, anyway?
I guess I was kind of lucky not going into using Unreal with any preconceptions, because I haven't really used a lot of engines hands-on before. And we had an entire team of people doing our project, none of which had really used Unreal before. So yeah, I think everything was kind of a pleasing sort of excitement of like, oh, and I can do this, and oh, I can actually do this, oh, and I can change this. So yeah, it was a very fun experience. Not that there weren't some things like, oh, I thought I was going to be able to do this, but it can't. And maybe that is a preconception, is this idea that Unreal can do everything that you've ever possibly done in any other 3D package. There are some things that it doesn't do in the same way. And so learning how to adapt those ideas. I've recently contacted Alex. Luckily, we have him accessible in Queensland to actually come in and talk to us. I contacted him about trying to make face me's, which is a thing, if you've ever used Maya, that I've relied upon in foliage previously. And he was like, oh, Unreal doesn't exactly do that. At least not in the simple, you know, plug and play way you're used to. I was like, what? I thought Unreal did everything. But I think in this case, I'm going to have to adapt the thing I want to do to the way that Unreal has got that implemented.
Yeah, and yeah, actually, I mentioned that anecdote earlier on. Yeah, we call it cards, and you call it face fees. So that was a weird thing with the like. Not only do you, Izzy and Dana, have issues with like the terminology, but it's like it's in between game engines as well. So and
for
other
context as well,
packages.
I worked on console games for many years, about 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. And so I transitioned basically from console games of the mid-2000s into mobile games of the 2020s. And that's actually a pretty good transition. And, you know, we were able to, I was able to make the transition over pretty well, but it does mean that some of my terminology is actually really out of date for the sort of stuff that people use now. Like, I had to go look up what trim sheets were. And then I was like, oh, it's a tiling texture. Yeah, we have those. It's okay. But sometimes, yeah, knowing, thinking of like the learning problem, knowing the terminology to search for, this is why I eventually had to go to Alex for this problem, was I had to describe to him the thing that I wanted, because face me's is a very Maya-specific term. It doesn't translate to a lot of other programs.
Yeah, so I guess this kind of is another perfect segue to, has your experience with the engine prompted you to learn new skills? I know it has for me, because as a programmer, usually we're like very focused on code and that's it, but I've actually dived out a little bit more into tech art and shaders and stuff like that. We might put the mic to the programmers as well, and the other folks on the floor. What do you, how do you guys, how have you adapted to maybe learning new skills and stuff like that?
I've been the same in that I've kind of dived into tech art a little bit when I can. I'm not very good at tech art, so it takes me a while, but yeah. Everything's kind of approachable if you can do it within the editor. So it's very easy to pick up new skills just to like do the very basic version of what you want to achieve. And then you can go to someone else and be like, how badly did I do? So that's been fun.
Yeah, I guess I definitely spread across more stuff than I used to be. I guess I come from like a gameplay programming background, which really just means generalist, like I do whatever. And I guess the consistency of tools between Blueprint and, say, the animation graph means once you know how to use Blueprint, you can really work in animation. And so I'd never done serious animation code before working on Unreal. And yeah, the set of tools and the kind of code-driven stuff you can do, I think does make it easier to just pick up something else. And once you know that, you can work in, sequencer is also a very similar set of tool chain, so you can pick up cinematic stuff, and then the shader graph is not too different. And so I think the consistency of tools that Unreal supplies does mean that it's easier than it might be in a different engine to jump between different areas.
I was just going to jump off on that and say, yeah, I've recently been learning about sequencer too from my art director, Rob. He was teaching me how I can use it in ways that I was similar. Like, I have knowledge in Photoshop and Photoshop actions and how to, record things and press play and export multiple assets all at once. And I was like, there's no way Unreal will be able to export multiple assets like that. I mean, why? But you can, and just learning that, wow, I can actually just do this in here from, I don't have to bother anyone with, asking for the FBX files. I don't have to bother people elsewhere to make me a script for Photoshop. I can just jump into Unreal, open up Sequencer, put a whole bunch of things in there, set up my own asset room sort of thing, and do it all myself. And I was like, okay, so where am I going to go from here? And it's kind of just been a deep dive into other bits and pieces that I can pick up. That have kind of just felt like an accident or just more intuitive, I would say. So yeah, a bit of everything, I would say.
I've definitely just been, again, kind of having to update my own brain to think about kind of UI animation, whereas previously it's very making static art kind of in general, and then now static art assets, and I've had to, Unreal has been a huge asset in being able to, sorry, oh my God, just make things that feel responsive and move and have good timing, and it's something that I now really focus on when I'm playing games more as well. So yeah, I don't know, a static to a more kind of active, moving. I'm just doing really fun animation. It's been really cool.
And Hannah, how about yourself?
Yeah. Thinking of Sequencer, I'd actually forgotten that we'd had to use some of that for a few of our scenes. And yeah, like I said, very similar to Maya, so that was quite easy to pick up. I've also delved into shaders, which previously not had any experience with, and not just making material surface colors, but adding in animation and color variation and all these sort of things. Because the interface is very artist friendly. It's very visual and intuitive. You plug and play different little assets into each other. You don't have to write code. Often I would make my shaders, however, and then I would hand them over to our tech artist and, as you're saying, how badly did I do? And they would clean them up and make them all nice and actually run properly. But I could prototype stuff in the shaders, and it worked, even if it was messy. I also got into the effects, so into, I believe it's Niagara, briefly, and found that, oh yeah, I could pick this up. I didn't have a chance to deep dive, but initially the experience wasn't off-putting. It wasn't something I felt like, oh no, this is too technical for me. I can't get into this. It really reminded me a lot of other programs that do effects that I've encountered previously, so the interface was very familiar.
Ooh. Well, we're at time now, but the last, and we want just one thing answer or one word answers, or as short as you can. But what has you excited about Unreal Engine 5?
I haven't actually looked at it yet, to be honest. I mean, we're like it's far enough out, but we're not going to switch to it before we finish something. So I've got enough to do.
The new interface.
Yes. How about
the Niagara Particles thing, I remember Chris, I think, mentioned something about being able to use that in kind of UI space, UMG. Anyway, I'm like, that sounds crazy. That sounds really, really cool. I would very much like to do a bit of learning around that. I mean, I think you can do that now, but again, I don't know, UE5 sounds like it's going to be just more, better, bigger number.
Yeah, it just sounds easy. I mean, not easy, sorry. It sounds just like an improvement on a bunch of things that we would love to see.
Yeah, I believe virtual runtime textures are already in the current UE, but I assume they're going to be sort of fleshed out and expanded on a bit more in UE5, and it's something that we didn't get to use this project that I really want to look into a bit more, because this idea of like being able to create your environments in a really organic way is something I've enjoyed about Unreal, and I think that that's going to just be more so in UE5.
Sure. And yeah, I think all of us at Epic are quite excited to show it off. So if you haven't checked it out already, there's the early access. Now, fair warning, we do not recommend it for production just yet. So wait, if you're wanting to do production, wait until the previews. We're at time, so I want to thank all of our lovely panelists for coming along and talking today, especially for the ones who are physically there. Unfortunately, me and Hannah, we got locked down because we're both in Brisbane. But we would love to come and see you next time. Hopefully there is an opportunity for next NZGDC. And we hope you all have a lovely day. So I'll also share up a little bit of a slide deck, because this is the fancy little place for our, that's coming through, right? Yeah, so we've got the UE Oceania Community Discord. So this is the one that Jordan was mentioning. So if you'd like, join that. Yeah, we'd love to see you hanging out and sharing off all your cool stuff and your experiments and all that. And yeah, reach out anytime. Cheers, folks.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.